Hey there guys, welcome back to ARTFX Studios, and this is a new bass design video. We haven't done this in a while, and today we're gonna be creating this neuro-ish kind of bass. Yeah, so I think that sounds quite good, and you could definitely use that. You can chop it up, rearrange it, create a really cool bass line out of this. And the way I created this, let's just get to it. So I have a track right here. I've turned off all the effects and all of the modulation. So we now only have the sub oscillator and two oscillators going on down here. And what I've done is I've created a bunch of notes right here. I've created 4 clips, and they're all slightly different, as you can see. And in these clips there's actually pitch modulation going on, so I'm actually doing pitch bending. You can see on the first one I'm actually bending down in pitch. The second one I'm doing this upward shape and then going down. The third one is going up, then jumping back down, staying there for just a little while, and then it's dropping back down all the way to here. And the last one has no pitch modulation going on. So that'll give it some extra movement. I don't know, it will give it some extra change in the actual tone of the sound, and it's gonna make a huge difference. Now, with just these two oscillators and the sub going on, we have something sounding like this. So it's nothing too crazy, right? It's really simple sounding. Now the first thing I wanted to try out, and I have to move into the wavetables right here. If I just turn off the warping mode for now, I have this waveform right here. And if we go into the wavetable editor, I basically just drawn this shape myself. You can do that if you let me just create blank serum so I can show you. And it's really cool if you just draw your own waveforms, you know, you can really create some interesting stuff. Now what you have to do is bring this down to 0 for both the horizontal and vertical axis, and what you can then do is just draw in a shape like that. So that's what I did. Drawn in a shape like that, and we'll be able to play that. And what I then did is if you look at the patch right here in the wavetable editor, you can see I actually have 2 frames. So I have this one and one with just a little bit of noise there. That's the only difference, and I'm morphing from the clean one into the slightly more crispier one. So how did I do that? If I go into the wavetable editor right here of the clean serum that we have, you just click this little plus sign, and it'll create a duplicate of the waveform that you've drawn, and then you select the noise shape right here, and just drag in a little bit of noise, like so. Now it's gonna sound slightly crispier. And what you then can do is you can then do a spectral morph, which will morph between these waveforms. So making it slightly more crispy. So that's what I did in this patch for both of the first and the second oscillator. I drawn a shape myself like that and just added a little bit of noise, and then I morphed them so that you have basically a clean version and a slightly more crispy version of the same waveform. I did that for both the first and the second one. So if I turn off the warping modes right here, you can see I have the same thing going on for both of these. Now the second one, it morphs slightly more, does a little bit of additional movement. That's just a downside of the morphing. I don't know why it happens, but it still sounded cool, so I'm fine with that. Now the warp modes, I set this to asymmetrical for both. So, well, let me show you the waveforms just on their own. This is the first waveform. Don't know if you can hear that, because it might be quite quiet. And this is the second one. A little bit more bass heavy on that second one. And together, that's sounding quite cool. Now, I've got some detuning on these two. So I have 2 voices on the first one and 16 voices on the second one. And both are set to a detuning amount of only 0.01. So that's just a very slight little bit. But we're gonna get into that. We're gonna modulate that. So I can also turn on the sub, which I've done. Sub is going directly to the output. And that's basically it for setting up the waveforms and setting up the oscillators itself. Now, the random phases are down to 0, so it starts from the same position in the phases, but because there's some detuning, we're gonna get some phase cancellation and we're gonna get that nice morphing kind of sound. What I did here is, let me go through here. So I have 3 LFOs that are controlling several parameters inside Serum. The first LFO is controlling the effects on the filter, so we're not really going to look into that now. The second one is controlling stuff on the oscillator. So the first thing that I'm doing is I have some modulation going on by LFO number 2 on the volume of both oscillator A and B. Now you can't see it because the level is all the way up, but if I bring that down you can actually see that we've got some modulation going on there. But I'm bringing the level all the way up, so you're not actually hearing the modulation of this LFO. But I'm then controlling level this one with this macro. So during several parts of the sound I'm actually gonna automate that macro knob downwards, so that when you move that macro downwards we're actually gonna get that movement, because we're gonna go to a lower position and then that movement will be heard. But when this level knob is set up all the way to 100%, you won't hear the effect of this wave or of this LFO. So right now you won't actually hear anything from this LFO. It will basically still sound the same, but that LFO will be added later on. It's just gonna add some extra movement. I guess I can show you. I just have to that one and do that one. So now we go into the automation lanes. You can see my automation lanes right here. Now the first macro is called mod, and that's basically this bottom automation lane. So you can see that pretty much on those higher notes I'm bending up, I'm automating that that macro knob upwards. So during this part we're actually going to hear that LFO movement. Let's see if we can hear that with what we've got right now. So you can hear some volume automation going on, but it's not really sounding that interesting. So what I did is I took a second macro knob and called it rate, and this one is actually controlling the speed of the LFO. Now this LFO is not set to BPM mode, so it's actually a free running LFO, and it's set to Hertz mode. So we can actually define this in Hertz instead of beats. Now I can bypass that or activate that so that we now have the movement again, and you can see that this macro, the second one, which is this automation, is controlling the speed of that LFO. So now we should get the same thing with the volume automation, but with a faster rate than what we had before. And right now it doesn't do that much, but it's gonna make a huge difference in the end. So then I think we can move into the filter. I've chosen the multi-filter, one of the more filters, the low pass, notch, high pass 12. I have to look. I'm using LFO number 1 to control the filter cutoff and the resonance. So with that added, we now get that. That's sounding okay. I quite like that. I'll have to see if there's anything else going on here. No. Now for the macro knobs, I wanted to give it a little bit more width during those higher notes, when it actually, during the parts where you can hear that LFO modulation. I wanted to get some more width in there. So what I did is I took the first macro knob, which is controlling this level. So remember, when we turn this up, we're getting that LFO modulation because we're moving the level down. Now I've basically assigned that macro knob to the detuning as well, to create, well, a slight feeling of more width in the sound as soon as we move up into the higher notes, when we get that LFO modulation going on. So I can activate those two, and now we will get, well, probably a hugely different sound from what we had before. So you can hear it really makes it sound much wider, but we're losing a lot of volume as well. We're really getting a lot of phase cancellation, and that's okay. At this point in the sound, that's okay to have. So let's just see if we have some other things that I need to talk about. I've got one more thing going on right here in this part. I used a third LFO. And this LFO is actually controlling the low pass filter in the effects tab, but it's also controlling the wavetable position. Remember, I created these wavetables with a slightly clean version and a slightly crispy version on the other end. The third automation lane, which is this one, which I added basically at the end of the sound because I wanted to give it some more movement, I used that as well on the wavetable position. So if I activate those, right now, if I play this, you can see that these knobs are going to be moving as well. So we're actually going to move into that crispy version of the sound every now and then. Just adding a little bit more movement. So that's it for basically the entire front page of Serum, and now we're gonna move into the effects tab. So the first one is the hyper, and I think I've used, yeah. So the first macro knob is controlling the mix on the hyper and on the dimension. So if I turn on the hyper, we can now hear a little bit more stereo width again when this macro knob moves up. We had quite a lot of stereo width as well to begin with, but this just adds even more stereo width to it. And when making neuro basses, you really got to remember that stereo width is really important when making these kind of sounds. So I also did the same with the dimension. Not doing too much, it's just sitting there just to make it slightly different. You don't really have to do that much, but I quite like doing it like that. It sounds pretty cool. So then we can move into the EQ. Now the EQ is set up, it has two notches, as you can see, and I'm controlling the frequency of those notches with the two macro knobs that I've already set up. So I'm using macro knob number 1 to control the frequency of the second band right here, and I'm controlling that frequency with macro knob number 1. And macro number 2 is controlling the other frequency. So without that EQ, with just adding a little bit more movement to the sound. It has quite a lot of movement already, but I feel stuff like this, definitely notches in Neuro basses, really make it sound, well, it gives it a totally different feeling when you just sweep a couple of notches through it, especially when you do that before distorting the sound, because it's definitely going to affect the way the distortion acts on the signal. Now, I've added the distortion afterwards, which is just the hard clip mode. Drive is almost all the way, almost halfway, and the mix is just below halfway as well. So that just adds a little bit more volume to this, I guess. Because we had some parts where there was quite a lot of phase cancellation going on, and therefore we lose quite a lot of volume. And this kind of like brings that volume up a little bit, but we're gonna bring that up even further later on. So then I've added the flanger. The mix is about 10 o'clock, and I think I've left all the other settings alone except for the rate. I switched on BPM mode and I set that to 1 bar. Now all of these clips here take 2 bars, so this flanger will just move back and forth twice during every single one of these bass sounds. So just gonna add a little bit of a flanger sound on that. It's not too audible, but it's nice to have these kind of things in there. Then we have the phaser, which I've also set to 1 bar, and I brought the frequency down. The depth is halfway, and the feedback is down quite a bit as well, and the mix is set all the way down, so that's quite interesting. Fact that I'm so we have LFO number 3, which I haven't used before, and I'm using that to control the phaser mix. So not too audible again. Definitely adds something to the sound. I like adding these subtle differences, you know, just these subtle things that really, all these little things add up, you know, and in the end it's gonna make your sound much more interesting. So take your time and just dial in these effects the way you want and the way you think they sound good, because that will really make a huge change in the way your sounds will sound in the end. Now the next thing is a chorus. Now chorus is just there to add a little bit more stereo width to the high end of the sound. By default your chorus will be set to a low pass mode, so it has a low pass filter right here, and it will basically low pass the chorus signal. But if you click that, you can switch that to a high pass mode, and now this will actually be a high passed chorus. So I'm just adding a little bit of chorus on the high end frequencies, and I brought the mix down quite a bit. It's just about 10 o'clock, and I brought the depth down to about 12 o'clock, and that just adds a little bit more stereo width to the high end frequencies. I don't think it's too audible, but this is without, this with. Sounds pretty much the same, but it's those little things that matter. Then I used the multiband compressor just to bring the level up and to really control every single frequency. Because we're adding all this modulation and filtering and movement, we're getting a lot of, well, we're losing a lot of frequencies, but not all in the same spot. I mean, during the first part we might lose some low end, during this part we might lose some high end, and here we might lose some mid. That's just an effect because of all the filtering and all the movement that we've got going on. So to balance that out, you can use a multiband compressor to kind of like squash it all down together and to really bring those more close together, but still have that modulation, that movement in the sound that we've created. So without the compressor, now with, that really brings up the high end. It really makes it sound nice and fat and big, and that's what we want, right? So then one last thing, I've added a low pass filter, and I'll have to see. So LFO number 3 is controlling the mix of that low pass filter, and our third macro knob, which is that top modulation, is controlling the filter cutoff. So now with that added, we get quite some more modulation. This is without, and then with. So we get more movement again. That's sounding really awesome. Now I'll have to see if I've done any more. So macro number 1 is also controlling the wet knob of the flanger. Oh yeah, so the flanger is actually going up during the movement on that macro, and that adds, well, even more of a flanged high-end kind of sound. That's quite cool. I like that. I think that's it. LFO number 2 is also controlling the phaser frequency. Okay, that's interesting. It's not gonna be too audible, I guess. Nice. And that's it for the entire Serum patch. So it's quite a complicated patch, but it's quite an interesting one as well. Now we're gonna move into the effects. So what do we got? The first thing that I did is I added an auto filter. Just gonna add even more movement. I mean, I can't say this often enough. Neuro bass is all about movement. So filtering is your best friend, and just adding these little things to add some filtering to it will definitely make a huge difference. I've set the rate to 1 bar, so again, this notch filter is gonna move back and forth twice during these sounds, so that's pretty cool. And then I decided to do a little bit of frequency splitting. I wanted to add some movement to the mids, but keep the sub clean. So I made my little frequency splitting rack. I went with the easy version using just the multiband dynamics. You can do it in a different, more clean way, but I just wanted to do it like this right now. So just doing frequency splitting, and on the mid band, which is this upper one, I have a WOW2 filter set to a band reject, and I'm using this last one to control the filter cutoff, and that's actually this little thing, and you can see I'm controlling the rate of that. Basically kind of like an LFO, multi-stage LFO, and I'm automating the rate of that with a envelope and an LFO, and that's the envelope and that's the LFO. I'm using those to control that particular rate, but I'm also using the LFO to control the resonance. Now the LFO is also controlling the dry wet, and I've used the parabolic distortion, or the hyperbolic distortion, sorry, in front of the filter. So without that rack, it sounds like this. With the rack, makes it sound quite crazy, but that's all I was going for. Next in the chain is outside of the rack again. I have a Valhalla vintage verb. It's just adding a lot of the reverb that you hear in the final sound. It's basically the default preset. I just brought down the decay a little bit, brought down the mix, and I brought up the low cut so that we only have, so that we don't have any sub frequencies going on in the reverb. The mix is quite low. It's just adding a little bit of reverb, but the key thing is that after that reverb, I've put an isotope trash too. It's set to multiband mode. The first band, the low sub band, I've added push-pull in the saturate category, and I brought up the drive a little bit, so bypass the other ones. Without. With. Just get a little bit more low end in this. It just saturates the low end a little bit. Then on the second band I have two stages of distortion. Let's start with the first one. It's positive in the fuzz category. I brought the style down a lot, and I brought the mix and the gain down a bit, and that will turn it from this. Then I added stage 2, which is the clip control under the distort category, and this time I brought the style up, brought the drive up as well, and the gain and the mix are down again. So that's adding quite some distortion to the mids. Then on the high band I've added the rectifier under the fuzz category, and brought the drive up a little bit, the style is down a little bit, and the gain is down a little bit. So that really makes the high end nice and crispy. This also brings up the reverb that we added before. So now the reverb actually becomes part of the sound instead of just being a layer that's sitting on top of the sound. And then I've added a little EQ8 just to bring the mids down a little bit because they've become a little bit too harsh. So just brought those down a little bit, and then finally I've got a glue compressor. And this compressor is just a way how I like to compress bass lines. So I set the attack to the lowest setting, and I set the release to 1.2. Then I bring the makeup gain all the way up, and I turn on soft clipping. Then when you play the sound, it's gonna sound super distorted. I can do that because the soft clipping will make sure that we're not gonna destroy our speakers, but not gonna sound too good. Then it's all a matter of bringing that threshold down until it starts sounding good. So ended up at minus 27. So this is before. It's a nice sound, but we need to balance it out, and after that compressor we really balance out that sound. So that's it basically for the entire patch. I then recorded that, and what I did is I reversed all of these little things. So I basically just recorded this entire thing and to one audio file. I dropped that in and I reversed it. Then, because if you look at this, you can see it's a long clip. It's actually just this entire thing, but then reversed. I chopped them back into separate clips, and what I then did is I added a little bit of a volume fade, because some of these sounds at the end just don't sound nice in my opinion. But it sounds like this, just now that part at the end I don't really like that, so I just take that out. I may turn it into something like that. Now you can already hear that these first parts could pretty much be a nice sounding rise as well. Pretty much a cool rising sound. Now then what I did is I added another Valhalla vintage verb. A little bit longer decay this time. Mix is slightly higher than the last one, and the low cut is also brought up. And this is just gonna add even more reverb to it. Now, because we had reverb in the original sound before we reversed it, the reverb is now actually sucking us into the bass sound. And I wanted some reverb at the end as well, so we get some reverb from this part, basically just flowing into this reverb that's coming up in front of the next one. So that's just a little trick how I like to process my basses. Then I added that same compressor thing again, this time going down a little bit further on the threshold, and that will bring up those reverb tills. So with that added, we get something like this. There you have it. So that's how you can create really awesome Neuro basses. You can chop this up, you can rearrange them, you can bounce this down to audio, whatever you want. Put it in a sampler, I don't know, the possibilities are endless. But the key thing is create movement, create a lot of movement, and then bounce stuff down to audio. You never know when you're gonna be using this, but just have a whole array, array of these sounds ready in your sample folder, just so that when you need a sound like this, you don't have to go and sit down and do this really cumbersome, lengthy process, but you can just drag in a couple of sounds, pitch them up and down until they fit. That's it for this video. If you want to get 40% discount on all my sample packs and preset packs, go to my website, which is www.artfx-studios.com. On there, if you fill in the code 40K special during the checkout, you will get a 40% discount on all of my packs. That will be running till the end of July. So I did it last month. I've extended it with 1 month, so it's going to be running till the last day of this month. Now, if you want to know more about my videos, subscribe to this channel or go to my website. If you want to see more of these videos, subscribe as well, obviously. There's going to be a whole bunch of these kind of videos coming up. If you have a request for a sound, or if you wanna just want to know something more about a particular kind of sound, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to come back at you as quick as possible. That's it for this video, and I hope to see you back soon. Peace.